A Marine dug into the red clay outside Con Thien in 1967 would have had absolutely nothing in common with a PBR sailor threading a canal in the Mekong Delta that same week. Same country, same war, completely different planet. And that is the thing nobody talks about enough. Vietnam was not one war, it was 4, maybe 5. And the men who fought in each Corps tactical zone came home with experiences so different from one another that 2 veterans sitting at the same bar could trade stories all night and never once recognize what the other man went through. South Vietnam was carved into 4 tactical zones running north to south. 1st Corps up top along the DMZ, 2nd Corps across the Central Highlands, 3rd Corps ringing Saigon, 4th Corps down in the Delta. Each zone had different terrain, different enemies, different tactics, and different American units running the show. And the nature of the fighting in each one was so distinct that the war itself changed shape depending on where you were standing. Let me walk you through it, zone by zone. 1st Corps Tactical Zone sat directly below the demilitarized zone and some of the most brutal terrain in Southeast Asia. This was Marine country. The 3rd Marine Amphibious Force, known as 3rd MF, owned this zone. The 3rd Marine Division took the northern provinces along the DMZ. The 1st Marine Division covered the area around Da Nang and Chu Lai, and what they faced up here was something the rest of the country rarely saw at the same scale: conventional war. Now stop and consider what that means. Down south, American troops were hunting guerrillas, chasing shadows, walking into ambushes set by local Viet Cong, who disappeared into tunnels or blended back into villages. Up in 1st Corps, entire NVA divisions were crossing the DMZ. The 324 Bravo Division, the 325 Charlie Division, the 304th, the 308th. These were not guerrillas. These were trained, uniformed, regimented North Vietnamese Army regulars with heavy weapons, artillery, and the logistical depth to sustain weeks of fighting. The Marines along the DMZ were fighting a near-conventional ground war against a professional army. Lieutenant General Louis Walt commanded 3rd MAF early on and believed the Marines should be focused on pacification, protecting villages, winning the population. General William Westmoreland, commanding Maxby from Saigon, wanted the Marines pushed north to the DMZ to block NVA infiltration. Westmoreland won that argument, and so the Marines ended up strung out along a series of combat bases running east to west below the DMZ. The siege of Khe Sanh combat base began on January 20th, 1968, when the NVA 304th and 325 Charlie divisions, roughly 20,000 troops, surrounded 6,000 Marines of the 26th Marines and supporting units. Colonel David Lowndes commanded the garrison. For 77 days, those Marines absorbed relentless bombardment. Some days, more than 1,000 rounds of incoming rockets, mortars, and artillery hit the base. NVA siege trenches crept forward 200 to 300 meters each night. B-52 arc light strikes dropped over 75,000 tons of ordnance on the surrounding hills. Captain William Dabney's India Company, 3rd Battalion, 26th Marines, held Hill 881 Southeast. That was 1st Corps. Conventional siege warfare, positional fighting along a fixed defensive line, artillery duels, NVA divisions maneuvering in regimental strength. It looked more like Korea than anything happening in the rest of Vietnam. And then in the same zone, during the same Tet Offensive, the battle for Hue exploded. NVA forces seized the old imperial capital and held it for 26 days. Marines from the 1st Marines and 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines fought house to house, room to room, south of the Perfume River. It took a full week just to clear the south bank. Then 10 more days of urban combat to close on the citadel walls. Brutal, savage, point-blank range fighting of a kind the Marine Corps had not seen since Seoul in 1950. That was all happening in one tactical zone. Let that register. Now move south into 2nd Corps, the Central Highlands, 12 provinces, the largest tactical zone by area, and the most sparsely populated, triple canopy jungle, mountain ridges running up to 4,000 feet, temperatures that could swing 40 degrees between noon and midnight, and the Ho Chi Minh Trail threading through Laos and Cambodia just across the border to the west. The war in 2nd Corps was a border war. The NVA funneled divisions down the trail and staged them in Cambodian and Laotian sanctuaries. From there they pushed east into Kon Tum and Pleiku provinces, trying to cut South Vietnam in half through the highlands and drive to the coast. The American mission here was to screen that border and prevent any offensive against the populated lowlands. The 4th Infantry Division, the Ivy Division, carried the heaviest load. They arrived in the fall of 1966 and took responsibility for Western Kon Tum Province, an area of operations larger than any other divisions in Vietnam. The 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Cav, had been here first, fighting the war's first major battle at the Ia Drang Valley in November 1965. The 173rd Airborne Brigade operated here as well. And the nature of the fighting was something else entirely. In 1st Corps, Marines held fixed positions and absorbed NVA assaults. In 2nd Corps, American infantry humped through mountain jungle on foot, seeking contact with NVA units that had dug into ridgelines and hilltops. Landing zones for helicopters were scarce. Resupply was a constant problem. Units operated for days at a time under canopy, so thick that air support could barely find them. The Battle of Dak Tu in November 1967 was the defining fight of the Highlands. The NVA 1st Division moved 4 regiments toward Kon Tum Province, and the Americans countered with elements of the 4th Infantry Division and the 173rd Airborne Brigade. For 3 weeks they fought across a series of ridgelines and hilltops. The terrain dictated everything. Battalions moved on foot through bamboo groves 8 inches thick, through valleys choked with vines and leeches, and NVA soldiers who had dug in on the high ground and waited. The Americans would comb the hills, hit fixed positions, call in massive firepower, and then assault uphill against troops who fought stubbornly before withdrawing. Hill 875 was the worst of it. Companies from the 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry, 173rd Airborne assaulted up that hill and were nearly destroyed. A short round from a friendly airstrike hit their position. By the time they took the crest, the battalion was combat ineffective. The 173rd had to be pulled out of the Highlands entirely to refit. Here is the detail that most people miss about Dak Tu. Westmoreland called it a victory. 3 of the 4 NVA regiments were battered badly enough that they sat out the Tet Offensive. But the NVA achieved exactly what they wanted. By January 1968, half of all American maneuver battalions in Vietnam had been drawn to the border regions and away from the cities. The border battles were the setup. Tet was the punch. That was 2nd Corps, mountain warfare. Small unit actions in impossible terrain. Weeks of patrolling punctuated by violent hilltop assaults against dug-in regulars. A war of endurance and altitude that had almost nothing in common with what the Marines were doing 200 miles north. Now come south into 3rd Corps. The 11 provinces surrounding Saigon, and the war changes shape again entirely. 3rd Corps was the most densely populated zone after the Delta. 90% of South Vietnam's industry sat here. 7 million people, the capital city, and the enemy was different. This was the Viet Cong heartland. While NVA divisions dominated the fighting in 1st and 2nd Corps, 3rd Corps was run by the Central Office for South Vietnam, COSVN, the communist political and military headquarters that operated from base areas near the Cambodian border. The VC maintained 2 regimental headquarters and 9 battalions in the zone, plus thousands of local force and guerrilla troops. MacCV estimated the government outnumbered the VC by only 2 to 1 here. The terrain was different too. Rubber plantations, rice paddies, dense scrub jungle, and underneath it all, tunnels, hundreds of miles of tunnels. The 25th Infantry Division established its base camp at Khe Sanh in late 1965. They had no idea they were sitting directly on top of one of the most extensive tunnel networks in Vietnam. The Khe Sanh tunnels ran from the Cambodian border to the outskirts of Saigon. Hospitals, ammunition dumps, command centers, living quarters, printing presses, all underground. The VC could pop up inside the American perimeter, attack, and disappear before anyone could react. And so 3rd Corps produced a kind of war that existed nowhere else. Tunnel rats, volunteers, usually the smallest men in the unit, who went underground armed with a pistol, a flashlight, and a bayonet to clear tunnel complexes by hand. Captain Herbert Thornton of the 1st Infantry Division organized the first specialized tunnel clearance teams in 1966. His men and their successors found things underground that changed the tactical picture completely. In 1970, tunnel rats uncovered a major signals intelligence node. VC codebreakers had been intercepting, decoding, and translating every radio transmission from both the 1st and 25th Infantry Divisions. Every patrol route, every operation, read in real time by the enemy sitting in a hole in the ground directly beneath them. Think about the scale of that failure. The big operations in 3rd Corps were enormous sweeps through VC base areas. Operation Cedar Falls in January 1967 was the largest American ground operation of the entire war. 30,000 troops from the 1st and 25th Infantry Divisions, the 173rd Airborne, the 196th Infantry Brigade, and the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment smashed into the Iron Triangle, a VC stronghold northwest of Saigon. They uncovered tunnel complexes, seized huge supply caches, and forcibly relocated the population of Ben Suc. Operation Junction City followed a month later, hitting War Zone C in Tay Ninh Province. The 173rd Airborne conducted the only combat parachute jump of the Vietnam War during Junction City. But here is what made 3rd Corps maddening. After every sweep, after every massive operation, the Americans would leave and the VC would come back. The tunnels were never fully destroyed. The infrastructure regenerated. The shadow government reconstituted. 3rd Corps was a war of attrition, fought against an enemy who lived in the ground and controlled the population above it. It was not the conventional slugging match of 1st Corps or the mountain border war of 2nd Corps. It was something more insidious and more difficult to measure. And then there was 4th Corps, the Mekong Delta. 16 provinces at the southern tip of the country. And this might have been the strangest war of all. 4th Corps was home to more than a third of South Vietnam's population. It produced 75% of the country's food. The Mekong River splits into a sprawling delta of more than 3,000 miles of rivers, canals, streams, and waterways, threading through flat, flooded rice paddies and dense vegetation. There were almost no reliable roads. Bridges were predictable choke points. During monsoon season, the ground turned to mud, and air operations became unreliable. The only way to move, fight, and resupply was by water. And the NVA was not here. Not in strength. 4th Corps was a Viet Cong war. Roughly 70,000 VC fighters operated in the zone, plus another 11,000 political cadre running a parallel government. They knew the waterways intimately. They controlled roughly a quarter of the population, and the American forces sent to fight them had to reinvent a kind of warfare the United States military had not practiced since the Civil War. The Brown Water Navy. Task Force 116, the River Patrol Force, put PBRs, patrol boat riverine, on the main waterways of the Delta, starting in 1966. These were 31-foot fiberglass boats with water jet propulsion, twin 50-caliber machine guns, and crews of 4 enlisted sailors. They ran stop-and-search missions on river traffic, intercepted VC supply movements, and got into close-range firefights on narrow canals where the enemy was shooting from 10 yards away. Task Force 117, the Mobile Riverine Force, paired Navy river assault craft with the 2nd Brigade of the 9th Infantry Division. Armored troop carriers, monitors with 40mm guns and 81mm mortars, assault support patrol boats. The whole force operated from a floating base, barracks ships and barges that could move up and down the major rivers, launching 2- and 3-day search and destroy operations deep into canal networks where no road could reach. Soldiers lived on the water. They fought from boats, they assaulted riverbanks under fire, and pushed into swamps and paddies that swallowed men to the waist. Boatswain's mate First Class James Williams commanded PBR 105 in October 1966. Leading a 2-boat patrol, he engaged a massive VC force on the Mekong. By the end of the action, his team had destroyed or damaged 65 enemy vessels. He received the Medal of Honor, 65 boats, 1 patrol. That was the Delta. The Marines up in 1st Corps would not have recognized it. The 4th Infantry slogging through the Highlands would not have recognized it. The tunnel rats beneath Cu Chi would not have recognized it. A sailor on a PBR threading a canal at night in the Mekong, watching the tree line for the flash of an RPG that could kill everyone on board, was fighting a war that bore no resemblance to any of the others. And that is the thing that gets lost when people talk about Vietnam as if it were one experience. It was never one experience. A man who served in First Corps in 1968 lived through something closer to the world wars than to anything in the Delta. A man who served in the Highlands lived a war of isolation, altitude and jungle that had more in common with Burma in 1944 than with Saigon. Third Corps was a shadow war against an enemy who lived beneath your feet. Fourth Corps was an amphibious riverine campaign, fought on water in a landscape that barely qualified as land. Same war, same years, same flag on the shoulder, 4 completely different wars. And every one of the men who fought in them carried home a version of Vietnam that only the guys who were in that same zone, in that same year, in that same kind of fight could ever fully understand.